Okay, great. All right. So this week's SQL and FHIR Analytics meeting. I did not do very much preparation, I must admit, on this one. And I'm way behind from documenting in notes for last week. So I was a little out of sorts. So I will try and get to that as soon as I can. So for this week, actually, I was talking to Gene about having him come and present some work he's doing with generating view definitions using LLMs. He's interested, I think he was on earlier. Has worked at a payer here in Pennsylvania, UPMC and BeWell as well. And now he's a consultant and he's been doing some work experimenting and exploring using LLMs. He's interested in, MCP and that sort of thing. So I wanted to have him come and do a demo of some things he was working on, but he couldn't make it today. So he's going to try for next week. That was number one item. Number two, let's take a look. I totally did nothing. So no follow-up from me on any items, including the marketing. So
I posted like invitation, but yeah, if you can send me the time for the birth of feather, I can make a post on LinkedIn about that.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's the next action item for me is, let me grab those. I will send them to you and post on LinkedIn. We were talking about mailing, so I'll contact Neil on maybe using your mailing list. So we'll just try to spam all the channels because it's next week, I think.
It starts on a Saturday. This week.
Saturday, right? Yes, so yeah, that's right.
Let's do it tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, we will get to that as soon as possible. Trying to think if there's anything else from my side. I don't think so. We're extremely.
Yeah, I did some progress. So.
Yeah, I'm just double checking. I think that's it for me and for marketing. But yeah, do you want to go ahead and talk about your problem?
Just quickly show where we are. But that's mostly what we discussed last time. So for the expert operation, now we have ability to set the view reference and the view resource. So they all multiple, so you can send multiple view references and multiple view resources. Let's say it's 3 and it's 2, and then it will run. So now it simulates step-by-step execution. So you see it appears. So during development of this part, I got to that question. So what if export of some view is failed, let's say in the middle of execution? Do we want to stop the whole export operation or put some kind of status for the failed exports, or we can have a parameter like bulk export doing or bulk import doing, where we can have a different modes. So in one mode we can fail at the first error, and another mode we can try, like FHIR transaction do. So in FHIR you have a batch and transaction fails if any of operation failed, like CRUD operation, but the batch tolerate like partial failures. So that's my new topic when I was implementing, because it was failing. So I decided to implement like showing the failing status. You see that like a couple of views exported successfully and couple failed. This is probably can fail at the beginning because it's just a validation, but I can imagine that it may fail in the middle because, I don't know, out of memory or something else. And my opinion that like default mode could be like try to do the best till the end. So because it may take like a lot of time, and maybe people can use like partial results, even if the whole like not all views are exported successfully. But we probably need a special type of status for that it's partially finished. And we need statuses per view. What do you think, guys?
I like it. I like the. Oh, go ahead, John.
All I was going to say was this looks really good. I think there's kind of a few options. Like there's so this is an asynchronous operation. We've also got the corresponding synchronous operation, which we should look at in a sec. For the asynchronous operation, you poll for it and then you get a result, and the eventual result is either this structure or it could be an operation outcome itself that gives you all the information. Or, like you say, we could actually produce files of operation outcomes and like a different status or something like that so that you get partial results. Yeah, so I think that, yeah, so you've got a status on each individual output.
Yep.
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, and status may be used even in the middle. Yeah, when the operation is still in progress, we can show that one output already finished, another in progress. So that may help to people build UI. But if it's expensive operation, I'm thinking that people may use it. Or even in the middle, if nothing failed, if they see that one view is already exported, so they may start acting on it. So like having statuses on views. It is not required behavior, yes, so that the implementation may just say I'm in progress, and then like fail or do something. But for like advanced servers, they can provide this information. So like simplifying the life of the users.
Yeah, I mean, I like the details of the transaction broken out for sure. I think the question is like, I think the more interesting question is about the failures and how to handle those. I mean, these are going to be very long running transactions, almost guaranteed.
Yeah, and Steve, you have some notes, yeah?
Yeah. I think I put some notes on your original spec, but we handled this as well. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff in the back end that can fail at any point along the way. So I think how you've handled this is great. I think we just need a spot for an individual failure. You can have a single individual failure, and it looks like we can mark that there, and it's up to the client to figure out what they want to do with that. There's all sorts of failures in these data systems. So as long as we have the flexibility to mark that like you have, I think it looks great.
And Gina, hi Gina. So we're discussing like partial failure of export operation. So what do you think? Do we need the two modes, like fail fast, or and the mode which will like by batch will try to do the best?
It seems like what I've seen work really well is the submission. There should be a return code of success or failure on the submission. And then as these long running tasks are completing, then you indicate success or failure along the way, like you have here in the individual items. So what's the return code on the export itself? Can't recall.
So there is no code, there is a status.
Okay.
So we potentially may use HTTP codes as well, but the human readable is a status. So for now it's completed, but status of specific view export isn't failed, and another is completed. So, but it could be like partially completed. I don't know.
And you say you mentioned two other examples in FHIR.
Yeah, the one example is a batch and transaction operation. They have one is a fail if at least one fails, and probably roll back. So that's expectation from the FHIR server. And another is a batch. Batch means that it can fail partially, but like the server will try to do the best, like with every line of the.
So I guess I'm torn. If like, what's the expected use for a partial like when you have an error, would we expect someone to use the things that came out of it still, or is the most likely thing that they're going to resubmit?
That's the question, because of operation could be expensive. So maybe people can decide to use what they have, and they otherwise they have to wait another 2 hours. But
yeah, I guess that would be the thing is that what types of errors are going to still yield usable data, or is it?
So we're discussing that one view export may fail, but and others maybe succeed. So, and the question, yes, should we do this partially exported data, or we should just fail and say you should run again? But maybe the guy waited it for a couple of hours, then out of memory on the server or something like this, or out of disk space on the export device.
Another scenario might be a non-transient type of thing. So you sent a bunch of view definitions through, and some of them this server is not capable of fulfilling. So it did 5 of them, but 2 of them it said I can't do that because I don't have terminology functionality or something like that.
Yeah. And that's why then the question is, if you say the arbitrary 2 failed, are those 5 still usable, or is it, you're missing mapping tables and so the data is not useful? And I guess that's the question, is if the expectation is those 5 are still useful, then it's nice to give the error and say, here's the 5 that worked. If that data is interdependent and you're not going to be able to run your analytics without all 7,
Yeah, but I can imagine
wasting
use
everyone's
case.
time by continuing, and we're wasting everyone's disk space by hosting them because I can't use them without all 7.
Yeah, I think both could happen. Yes, so and I can imagine that the guys, for example, submitted 10 views, 9 of them are exported successfully. The last failed, so he can submit the only one view to like re-export and don't wait.
Yeah, so maybe that's something we add an input parameter for, as much as I hate just adding parameters, but something to say, I want partial results or not, because then if you say, if you can give me, 5 of the 7, great. But then also, if I'm not going to process this without all 7, then as soon as you hit an error, you can stop and free up the resources for everybody.
Yeah, that's what I call the mode. Yes, and
Yeah, that makes sense. I like it.
I don't remember how it's called in FHIR transaction.
That's not optional. In transactions, It's because batches are not and transactions are, and that's it.
Right.
It's a type, yes. It's called type, and it could be transaction or no.
Yeah, because that's the bundle type. So that's across all kinds of things.
Yeah, it's bundle type. It is batch or transaction, yeah.
Yep. Yeah, makes sense.
Okay, so then I will work on that. So I a little bit refactored the UI, so I split output and input parameters. What else? So I implemented the validate operation, but that's kind of trivial. So it's do the same as a FHIR validate operation. And I was thinking, and it's good that Gina is here, that maybe, so we have a problem with the formats. So how server can communicate the formats. And I'm thinking maybe the feature queries can help us with that. So we can say that the user's feature to request what formats are supported, and maybe Gina, you can tell us a little bit more about that. And what do you think? Is it good match for the format problem, or?
Yeah, that's exactly why that is being done. We've been trying to rebuild capability statements since before R5, and there's never enough appetite to have anyone actually work with it. So we kind of gave up and said, instead, we're going to do the feature query IG or the application feature. I don't even know what it's called these days.
And can you make very short introduction to the guys?
Yeah, let me try and pull it up. FHIR, what is it? Application feature framework, right?
And maybe even sketch for us how it may look for the formats of the server.
Yeah. So there's the link to the IG as it is today in the build site. And this is essentially capability statement 2. That's why you can see the tag on the URL as cap statements, is because that's really what this is a way of replacing all these complicated things for capability statements. And I can find...
Maybe you can share the screen for the...
yeah, I can do that. Give me a second. I was not set up for that. So centered with no camera, vector, and switch back to this. Hey, look at that. And that way I can share, make sure I don't have anything that can pop up here. What's this? That's on the other window. Perfect. And then I can share window projector. Hey, look at that. Magic. So this is the replacement for continuing to add to the capability statement. And we have all kinds of fun. Let's see if I can find where they are. If I go to the infrastructure minutes and I go to FHIR infrastructure, not conference calls, but work group meeting, FHIR minutes from Atlanta. Not that one, this one. Somewhere here we have whole sets. Oh, there we go. Look at that. I even found this. Right? Yes. So this was when we were talking about it at FHIR in Atlanta. And essentially, we are making triplets for capabilities. So IGs and everything can define what their features are and how they work. And so these are some of the types of tickets that we're trying to address with that IG, that, you know, people want to profile bundle, transaction bundles, and advertise non-search parameter things, and support, you know, which SQL version do you support, and, you know, all these kinds of weird things that there's no way we can actually describe in a capability statement that has a fixed structure. And so the idea here is you come through and define features. And then essentially you have this tuple that has a feature, a context, and value. And there you go. So the general patterns here, you can say feature alone, feature and context, feature and value, feature, context, and value, depending on how you're set up, and ask the server what it supports. So there's both a way of asking it in a query directly, which is an operation, or you can also just ask via HTTP header, which is to say, here's a required feature, and so I send you my request, but only honor it if you support this feature. And so
as I understand, the feature is advertised in capability statement with extension. That
in theory, you can. In practice, I would say no. What happens is you just ask the server what features it supports, and we've gone through and done, and I have to look through it. Rick Geimer has been updating this, but then he kind of pulled away from FHIR to work on TSC stuff. And so we plan to do another pass of that during this workgroup meeting. So the idea is that you can ask the server for the types of features it supports, or you can ask for a specific feature, what contexts or values it supports, and things like that, depending on how you architect. It's very loose, intentionally so, because again, if you go look at these types of things, we don't have any way of just like, we can't make a structure for like, that's going to cover supported SQL versions and your include, rev include third parameters and include iterate support. Like, these are all very obscure things. So what we want to do is say, okay, here's how you can describe whatever the heck it is you want to describe. And then your IG will tell you what that is. And so anyone who wants to use SQL on FHIR can go and ask, you know, the SQL on FHIR features. However, we decide to, you know, give that a canonical and then give it the context and values we want. And whatever we want to describe for how that support works, we can describe.
is feature identified by URL?
Yes, it's supposed to be. So when we talk about the features themselves, declaring features, there's a whole thing here.
There's
So you
not so
say
much examples in this IG, so it would be nice to have like a list of examples because it's.
Yeah, and that's why we've been working through, because Graham is already using this in production. And then I had built out a test server when we were working on it last, added it into Candle stuff. And so you can see there are example instances and things. And there is a Zulip thread somewhere that has all that stuff as well. But yeah, it's parameters that you do a feature query, and then that has the feature definition logical model, which hopefully is updated. And that's why this includes all the stuff about canonical, because it's a canonical. And then you have, you know, the qualifiers for the name of the feature, the description, and everything else.
Okay. And when you query by name?
Yeah.
Okay. But there potentially could be clash of names, yeah?
Yeah, and that's why I thought we had addressed it, because that's why all these things have canonicals, and we had done all that, but I don't remember what the resolution is off the top of my head, because I thought the idea was you can put a canonical here instead directly. And we were playing with all these things because the syntax of, you know, what things can have @ signs and what things can have parentheses, and we can't use the hash because that's used in canonicals and codes. And, you know, if you want to have this be a coded value, you need to be able to pipe separate, and like we had gone around on all those types of things. So
just put the JSON string here. Can you sketch?
You know, a fair bit of it essentially comes down to that, and it's just a matter of saying, okay, well, how do we make it so that you can support it in a URL encoded string?
Okay.
And have something sensical, because it needs to be able to be URL encoded in both of these.
Can you sketch
That's
how like querying what formats are supported for export operation may look like with the features? Just like.
Yes. So like here, you can have things like return values, and you get answers like you know, the idea was that you can ask for all those things so you can get it to enumerate the contexts or values as you need to. So that way, if we said like, you know, SQL on FHIR MIME type as the feature or something like that, then you can say, well, what are the values it returns? And it'll tell you the MIME types it supports. And that way you can figure out which one you want to call, or, you know, only do this export if you support this MIME type. And then when you get back a failure, because then it'll return a 501 not implemented, then you can fail back to the next MIME type that you would like, you know, all that kind of stuff. We tried to support both modes.
And I like this assertion mode when I can ask the server, do you support Parquet? And if it says yes, so I can just send it.
Yep. Yes, exactly. So we wanted to support both modes, that you can say, do you support it up front? And then you can figure out how you work, or you can just start sending requests and only if you support this set of features. And there were several, you know, I wanted to only have one or the other, but we couldn't. We said both are actually needed.
Yeah, the one is discovery and another is like just like make assertion about the server.
Yep.
Move forward. Yeah, and I think both are valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, and part of that came back to, like Graham was talking about, because he's using a lot of this for terminology related things. And so he's like, my server will not enumerate them. Like, you can't ask for the request and get back results because I have to span every single code system in the server, because I'm asking about like what types of things I support for a particular code system. So you can ask for a feature with the context of a specific code system and get back values, but you can't ask for all the contexts because that's every code system on the server, and I'm not going to enumerate that.
And can you like elaborate a little bit on the idea of the context, that I can ask feature for specific resource type? Maybe some examples. Yeah, you said that like for some code system you may support, I don't know.
Yeah, so like Graham's use, let me see if I can find that thread. Give me a second here. Where would that have been? I know it exists, which is the first step. FHIR scheme, FHIR validator, commits hooks, all the things. FHIR mapping language. No, where did it?
It could be resource type, it could be instance, yeah, like ID or something.
Yeah, and that's why we have a whole Zulip stream. I'm just trying to figure out where it is,
I think you said
because
yeah.
I can't remember. There it is. Feature capability. Let's see if I can actually find it. Zulip moved all these things around. That's why it's in my hidden streams now, because that's definitely where I wanted it. So we have this feature capability statement stream. Yeah, you commented in there, Nikolai. And so supposedly Graham has some of his examples in here somewhere. Terminology server, things we're ignoring. Maybe it's not in here. Yeah, I need to see where it is. Nope, that didn't have it. All right. But yeah, he was talking about things like if you want to know what properties a code system has. And so that's a nonsensical question in the context of a whole server, because every code system has different properties. And so in that case, the feature is something like code system property. The context is a specific code system, and then the values are the lists of the properties that are in that code system. And so that's why he's like, yeah, you can't enumerate that as a generic thing, because that's not something the server is going to answer with.
You know, could this be used for, we've seen a lot of confusion around search parameters on some servers of this collection of search parameters is supported, and there's weird combinations. Is that sort of contemplated here too?
Yes, it is. That is one of the things that we've talked about, is being able to go through and add all these tuples. I'm trying to see if we actually have a specific ticket on that one even, because that's one of the things. Yeah, supported sort orders, include third parameters, include iterate parameters, all these different things. Yeah.
All the flags. Yeah. A lot of the search flag or search extra keywords are not, there's no way to support that in the capability statement, if I remember correctly.
Correct. And that's why like the ones like max count or things like that, they aren't search parameters because they aren't. And so you can't put them here. And so we have this weird workaround where you put the name, but you don't put a canonical and, different things like that because it's not actually a search parameter definition. And so then you can just put the name and that way you can still advertise and blah, blah, blah. But it's the same thing. Like, how do you then start adding, like we said, like you were saying, the combinations of search parameters that when you come to US core, and definitely not that version, but we can pick a version, doesn't matter. And we come to capability statements, server. And so when you want to say, I support onset date, but then I also support doing patient plus onset date, or, in some of these, you only have to support that parameter if it's a combination query and things like that. And it's like, well, yeah, if you want to describe this, right now we have no way of describing that you can support for patient plus intent plus encounter on a medication request. But same thing, when we said, yeah, we're going to come back here and start adding, capability statement's already too big and a lot of people can't use it because you're getting megabytes worth of capability statements and that's not useful. And so if we start saying things like that you start putting combinations of search parameters and combinatorially explode that, that's not going to be useful. So then it comes back to, okay, do we, and again, we're defining the framework and we're putting some things together. And that's why we'll figure out, like, do we put a generic mechanism for doing combinations of search parameters so that that's just something like a core FHIR feature thing we describe? Or is it something that US core comes and says, you need to support the medication request searches and these are the different values you have, or something like US core search is the feature, the context is medication request, and these are the different values. There's some architectural decisions to be made there, but we're not comfortable pre-making them for all these weird edge cases so far. I prefer not to.
And you think it is a good idea to try it for our case?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's why it's, for our case, going through the spec and looking at it, it's like, yeah, we just have to pick what we want those tuples to be so that we can figure out, what kinds of features are interesting to be able to advertise, and then how we slot those into either feature alone, feature context value. That, yeah, we can pick, oops, wrong button again, whatever. I don't know where that button went, but saying you support SQL on FHIR, maybe that's feature. Actually, I generally would prefer feature plus value, because then you can say which version you support as the value, but maybe you want the value to be, the context, because then you can put values for all of the sub features that are inside the spec, so that then you can enumerate some of those things. I think it's really sitting down around a table and hashing it out more than anything.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, so I think, sorry.
That's okay. Yeah, your turn.
My thought process here is, so you want to know what sort of things are supported by the server, and you will potentially want to know that before you start issuing requests to the server. Maybe particularly because these requests are really expensive and long running, and maybe you don't find out about that until some way through the execution of the operation. So you want to sort of know that beforehand so you can know what requests to make. So what is the best way to do that? So I guess, so this is really cool, and I was not aware of any of this. So this approach is kind of like, think about all the different features of your server and sort of define them as features, and then provide an API to sort of query those features and all the rest of it.
Yep, there's the operation, and that's why I like having both, because exactly what you're saying. When you do the integration with a server, or your first pass testing with a server, you might go through that whole discovery process and then cache your behavior. You know that it supports Parquet, you know that it supports, dynamic view definitions, whatever. But then on your requests, you can still put that header so that if something changes, 6 months from now, they go and update their server and forget to enable Parquet, someone DNS issue happens, whatever, and it goes to the wrong server, then in that request, it'll still fail and say, hey, hold on, we don't actually support Parquet. And then you won't, go through this weird diagnostic process of trying to figure out what happened.
It's like
It doesn't support it. You'll say, whoa, why don't you support it? You did yesterday.
But I think we
Yeah, the
can
other,
to play with this feature and feature queries for our cases, for the formats. I think it's a common use case could be like, do you support Parquet? Yes. Make this expert. Do you support like view definition? I don't know how we call it, like non-tabular, yeah? Okay, so I send you these views, please export it.
Yeah. And it sounded like you had more, John. Yeah.
I was just going to say the other approach to it that I had in my mind, which I don't know if this is better or worse, and I think there could be potentially some implementation challenges with it, is instead of trying to put everything in the capability statement or trying to, individually query features, just have like a variant of the operations or a parameter to the operations where you say, don't actually execute this, just tell me whether it can be done effectively. So we were talking about like some sort of pre-flight use case where you give the server a bunch of an operation or a bunch of view definitions or whatever, and it effectively tells you yes or no, I can do this. And that could actually reach into like things that are maybe too fine-grained for features as well, like path functions or whatever. So for sort of completeness, that was kind of another thing I had in my mind, but I think this is probably much more well thought through. And I think we need to go to the next step of thinking about how this maps onto SQL on Fire to actually work out whether this will work or not.
And that operation, you can do it as a get. You can also do it as a post. And in both of those, you can put a lot of features. And that's why we made sure you can support the post as well. So that way you can ask it about 200 features at once and get back your entire feature query that then you can go and build your parameter for. Because we didn't want to be round tripping for every single feature that you want to be able to do in this either.
And potentially the idea like pre-flight can be implemented as a features, I think. So you can split into the features and query. But let's play with this. Let's play for simple cases and then see more complicated stuff.
Yep. Yeah, and Madrid for the Connectathon, I am primary is still cross version on anything that's not published yet, but this is my second tier of things is working on feature capabilities. So
maybe let's find a couple of hours.
Looping.
Yeah,
Yep.
Sit down together, and we have a good like application for SQL on Fire, at least the basic. We can
for sure, and that's good because then I have to finish my implementation of that as well. Started writing all the stuff,
and John mentioned that like the Fire Pass implementation will probably different from engine to engine. So and this is a nice way to ask what Fire Pass features you support, like
that would be that's a great use case too, just in and of itself to say, feature for FirePath functions and whether it's the context or the value and playing with some of those things to say, just enumerate me all the FirePath functions you support. And not every server will be able to do that, obviously, especially by default. But for people who are interested in that kind of thing, here's how you support it and here's how you can do it interoperably and just enumerate those. And I think that would make Brian Postleway very happy so that he can compare the FirePath engines with each other.
And for us, it is essential. I mean, the view definition you run through the FirePass, and most of implementation will have a subset of FirePass. And this discovery may be critical because do you support this function or not? And we don't want to push people to implement everything. Yes, so some extra functions may be labeled like optional, but you will have a way to query because we don't even understand how we can describe it in a spec, what the subset of FirePass we're going to support, And with this feature, if you invent the way to query that, for the function, it's quite simple, So you can just say the name of the function and do, But that's...
and I can see, as things move forward, that there's a lot of things you can do because it's the same types of things with search. Well, if you don't support this search parameter, I can just do an overly broad search and then filter. But that's much more expensive. And so it's the same thing here. If you don't support a given function in FirePath, there's probably another way to do it. It just involves me doing an overly broad one and then refiltering it on my side. And as long as both parties know that, that's fine. But that's perfect.
Okay, cool. Let's experiment. And I have another topic to discuss. So because I'm pushed by our guys about like materialization operation, which the context, that the idea that it should work like a black box. So I'm just asking, here's a view definition, make it work magically as a black box, maybe support it up to date, and the server, like I'm telling you, do that. The server will try to do the best. Yeah, it could be like incremental updates. It could be like real time, near real time stuff. But yeah, for example, in our case, we can create a view, a materialized view. We can like keep it up to date or like refresh periodically. So my idea was maybe call it materialized operation in our case. So or maybe you have better ideas. So how you can say the server, here's a view definition, keep it up to date, materialize it, not just export, yeah, because export is a, how to say, it's a special case probably of materialization. Yeah, I can imagine that you exporting, loading into some database and exposing the table in SQL API to the end user.
Well, is it just a variation on that though? Because I can imagine, so you want to export some data.
Yeah.
I was thinking about how to reword the documentation of this, and I think there's kind of like 3 different axes there. You know, like you either want it asynchronous or you want it synchronous. You either want it over predefined views or like ephemeral views, and you either want like a snapshot or updating or streaming or, you know, real time. So do we actually have to have, so we could play around with how we do the operations there, I guess. But to me, like you actually essentially want all the same parameters of exporting, and you want to get back like some sort of pointer to where this thing is. But you want to say, I don't just want like a set of files, which is a snapshot. I want something that I can connect to and I can get updates, and it's, so what does the black box look like in your mind? Like what's the pointer to the thing? Like is it still a URL? Like how do I, when you finish this operation to create this materialized view, what's the output of that, and how do I know how to sort of connect to it?
Yeah, so I keep in mind like one use case, yes, and maybe it could be generalized. So in our case, so at the end there could be the table, which I can send a SQL query or something like this. And I'm just telling server, keep this table up to date and use this view definition to keep this table working, yes. So, and essentially you can access it through the query, potential query resource or another API, or maybe even connect directly to the Postgres source, like, I don't know, BigQuery or something else, or even Spark SQL. So that's maybe a little bit outside, but the idea that you can tell the server, keep it up to date, and eventually we may come up with a SQL API, like query resource or something like this, like evaluate query resource with a SQL inside, and then we will like build top level abstraction. So keep this view up to date. I will send you queries. You will respond me with the results, and I don't care what's inside. Is it like Spark or BigQuery or Postgres or something else?
Okay, so like, if it's a black box, can I do these things? So say, okay, database and materialized view is one way of doing it. Another one might be, I've written a Parquet file to S3, but I'm streaming to it, and I want to keep pointing to that, and I want to get updates to that actual Parquet file on S3. So that's another one, which is different to the snapshot because of the expectations about it going forwards.
Yep.
And the third one is, I want a Kafka topic, which gives me the data as a Kafka topic. So like, could I have like all those 3 sort of things?
Yeah, my idea, if you're abstracting this way, so yes, we probably can use something like endpoint or I don't know, Gina, is it right way to describe how you can potentially access it? But yeah, the Kafka topic where the like server streaming flatten messages, is a good example, I think. Yeah, it could be Spark. It could be like incrementally updated S3 bucket or something like this.
Yeah, I think I'd want to spend a little time figuring out if that's a special, like a new channel of subscription, or if that's something.
This is like more. This is more.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to figure out is how to describe some of those things. Whether it's just an endpoint and you point to it, but then you also need to know more about the endpoint because you need to know auth and you need to know, is this a Kafka endpoint or are you directly writing to a database or is this server-side events or is this, whatever, there's a lot of those pieces that it would be nice to generalize from the similar types of things that we have in other places. We're trying to reuse as much as we can between bulk exchange and subscriptions as well. And so it's the same type of thing that when we go through and describe auth, we don't want to keep redescribing auth on how you do all these things. And so we want to make sure that there's hopefully a generic way that we can just say, yeah, this is a third-party endpoint we're sending stuff to and describe, how we're sending it, how we're authorizing, all that kind of stuff.
But they're like different layers. So we can say like export is essentially like bulk operation. Yeah. And we can like re-export maybe the diff, but this is like a bulk paradigm. Yeah. There's like streaming idea and the subscriptions idea, but it's still like low level. So you can say, I want to get the stream of changes for this view definition. Yeah.
Yes.
And that may work with the subscriptions. So I'm not getting resources. I'm just saying the payload should be the result of the view definition. And
yeah, and that's why I don't want to, our only tool is a hammer. So if there's a better way to do it, I'd rather, I want to spend a little time thinking on it before I commit to thinking which way is better.
Or the like top level abstraction, I say that just like keep something up to date. It could be anything, what you can do, but keep it up to date. Yes, so keep me live view how you can. Internally, probably the subscriptions working, something else happening, yes, but you're keeping up to date. Maybe with some parameters, how real time it could be, like some potential delay I may have, but that's implementation dependent, yeah?
Yeah, and I always struggle back and forth because that's when you start talking about it, and that's why I had the same discussion with the group in the Netherlands about, we don't need all of the things that are in subscriptions. And you say, okay, well, for instance, how do you know that something's broken? Then your pipe broke because it's always DNS. The DNS changed and you're not getting your updates anymore. How do you resolve that? How do you detect that that's happening? All these different pieces. And those are the kinds of things that we've put some effort into already. And I'd hate to reinvent, but I also don't want to say, well, subscriptions is the way we do everything. And maybe we need to refactor subscriptions quickly before R6 to generalize some of those things better so that we can use those pieces in more ways, some of those types of things. So I think we definitely want to noodle on it and chat about it so we can figure out what parts we need to describe that and then figure out if we can pull them out or if it makes sense to reuse them there or if they're just so different that we don't need to.
Yeah, the subscriptions definitely will be inside of this, but I'm still thinking about this, especially when we introduce query resource, yes, so then we can provide the black box. So here's the system, you requested like live views, and you can send queries to this live views, and you don't care what's inside. So if you're interested, okay, so there's like low-level API for that, but if you just want to have these views up to date and send the queries to these views, here's how you can use it. And maybe like provide like native endpoint to connect, if it's Postgres or Spark or something else.
Yeah, so something essentially like GraphQL++, saying, I know that my UI is going to be constantly making this query, and I'd rather you keep a materialized view and updated so that my UI doesn't have to go through and, pull 50 different resources to materialize, every single UI call, do it that way. Yeah, that makes sense.
Does subscription have a concept or allow a concept of like a Kafka queue, a Kafka topic rather?
Yeah, what we did is we said, here are the stock protocols that we're providing, and then here's how you define your own. That way we don't get into trying to pick, the details on things like a Kafka queue versus like I made a Zulip notification channel so that you can send your notifications to Zulip when things happen and stuff like that.
We did Kafka adapter, we did Google Pops Up adapter. We did review and nuts adapters. Yeah.
Yes.
It still maybe
And the hope would be
still maybe worse to like have a registry of all this possible stuff. And
yes, and that's why I think it would be nice if they can be canonical, and that was the point of making them the URLs, is that way hopefully we don't end up with 300 different definitions of how to use a Kafka queue, and that way you can just ask, do you support this Kafka queue URL, and then people can say yes, and you say great, then don't bother sending me via REST and having me put it in the queue. You can put it in the queue directly.
that's still not so much potential like queues where you can send all this stuff, maybe like a couple of dozens of them. And probably like next step could be try to standardize, because if the server support connector to the Kafka, yeah, I understand there could be like different like configuration for that, but essentially it's gonna be like simple. Here's the topic, just send it, and so on.
Yes. Yep. And I would love to see an IG that did some of those common ones. I did not have the bandwidth to try and do that yet.
Okay.
So
Yeah, I think the challenge of mapping SQL and FHIR onto something like subscriptions is that subscriptions is based around resources, and like the unit that we're talking about in SQL and FHIR is effectively like a row, because we've actually taken out of resources and we're flattening and putting it into something else. So we don't have any way of sort of representing so far, I don't think.
Yeah. But I think the payload is abstracted, Gina, in subscriptions. Yes. So
the payload is abstracted, and the triggers can just be events. And so your event can be, modified record in the database, can be time. So you can say, that same type of thing, like, yes, I'm updating this view every hour. You can just make your own event, and that's what you call it. And that's what's triggering the subscription.
Yeah, so John, I don't see that we could not like...
We tried to make sure that works.
Yeah. So I see that like in topic definition, you probably like make extension with the view definition, and that's your subscription.
Yep. Yeah, you could just say view updated, and that's it. Like that's your topic, is that the view definition was updated, and or the view results, or whatever however we would want to phrase it. But we could easily describe an event like that or a topic like that.
And in most cases, it will react on the resource change. So maybe we can agree how the updates and removes are like communicated. Yes, in case if you're streaming the records from view definition. But I think it's quite close. So we can have a stream of view definition.
Yeah, and we've found that there's a lot of back and forth about defining things in terms of FHIR resources at all or not. That especially when you get to EHRs that are not any facade server, they do not want things defined in terms of FHIR resources because they don't have materialized FHIR resources to trigger on. And so then a lot of times it's figuring out, what is the data event or property that we're actually after. And then, you can say like, yeah, we're interested because this order has changed its state. Great. There is a FHIR property for that, but also just whatever you're doing that, is the equivalent, whether it's a V2 ORM message or whatever it is, like, I don't care, but this is the type of information we're after. And so we've had a lot of back and forth around that.
So Gina, you think that we can integrate like view definition with the topic definitions and subscriptions?
I think so. I'd like to try it before saying yes, and I'd like to see, same thing. I don't want to say this is our only hammer. And so, I want to look at it and see, are there things that make sense to use, or are there things that make sense not to use? And any refactoring we want to do definitely before November. So
yeah,
any feedback we have, we'd like to do that. No substantive changes after November.
Okay, so we have to rush, yes, if you want to integrate the definitions with the subscription. But for me, I'm getting the picture. So okay, so you have an initial bulk export on a low level, then potentially you may subscribe to the view updates if you want to do it manually. Or if you have a like all-in-one system, you may say, just make me live view. And that could be the pieces. And they like all need it because people need updates after bulk export. They need bulk export before getting updates, so that all the things can work together.
Yeah, I think there's still, like you say, you just want to make a view available in Postgres or some other SQL-based system. That's like a different thing again. So as you say, there's probably both different things, like some sort of way to say materialize this thing, but also like a handoff to a subscription, potentially an optional handoff. All right, I think we're just about on time, at time.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Yep.